All right, moving on to number 6. Read the scenario below and then answer the questions that follow. Caller, good morning. Is this fashion boutique? Store clerk, yeah. Caller, do you have any linen suits? Store clerk, Menena. I knew here. Hold on, darling. Let me check. Caller, that won't be necessary, young lady. When you learn to speak properly on the phone, I will call back. Goodbye. And then the corresponding question states, state one reason why the caller was displeased with the store clerk's way of speaking. For me, again, the language register was inappropriate for the dialogue. A more formal or consultative register should have been used. And then B says, for each of the store clerk's responses, suggest an alternative response in the appropriate register designed to produce a favorable response from the caller. So for the response, yeah, I suggest that the store clerk could say, yes, this is Fashion Boutique. How may I help? And then for the response, may I know, Anna? I knew here. Well, on, darling, let me check. I am not sure, but I can definitely check. Part C, assuming that you are the supervisor of the store clerk and you have received a complaint from the caller, list one suggestion for improving communication between employees and customers. I would provide my employees with effective customer service training, stressing the importance of using the appropriate language in the right context. Moving on to number 7. You are a young advertising executive who has been invited to address a group of CAPE Communication Studies students on the advantages and limitations of advertising. You are ready to plan your presentation carefully because you want to communicate effectively. And then part A says, list 2 elements of the communication process other than the medium, which you should consider in planning the presentation. So I would consider my receiver or audience, who is my target for the message, and that would be the CAPE Communication Studies students. And I would also consider the feedback, which is the response given to my presentation. And then part B says, state one reason why the medium is an important element to consider in planning your presentation. And recall, the medium is the form that the message will take. So I would want to ensure that I select a correct medium, and this will enhance the opportunity for the CAPE Communication Studies students to receive exactly the message that I am sending. And then part C says, you anticipate that one barrier you might face is that your message might not be clear enough to some members of your audience. State 2 ways in which you would effectively deal with this barrier. All right. So this question speaks to communication barriers and facilitators, specifically noise. So for me to have my message being clear to the CAPE Communication Studies students, sure that I use the correct tone and that I am very clear. Again, I would ensure that I use the correct medium or channel. I would ensure that I select the right timing to present to these students. Presenting in the morning could be more advantageous than presenting in the evening after lunch when the students eat and are more tired. And lastly, ensure that I don't, force a lot of information on these students, make my presentation more interactive, keep my advertising jargons to myself, right? Since I'm coming into a new setting here. Then number 8 is a continuation of number 7. As the young advertising executive, identify 3 types of nonverbal communication other than graphics that you would take into account in preparing your presentation. So I placed a BRATA here. They asked for 3, I gave you 4. You could consider proxemics, which has to do with the proximity between you and your audience. You don't want to be up in their faces, so you provide adequate space between you and your audience. Go too close to these students, they would be more distracted or have anxiety. And then secondly, since I am a young advertising executive, I would consider my dress. I would think that formal attire would suit this presentation best. Thirdly, I would consider my paralinguistic features of my presentation, that I use the correct tone of voice, speed, breathing, pronunciation, articulation, pauses, and punctuation. And lastly, kinesis or posture or my body language, I would ensure that it is in sync with my presentation. Then part B says, describe one form of graphics you could use in your presentation. PowerPoints, charts, and flow charts. Let's give one reason why you would use graphics in this way. So since I am presenting to these students, the PowerPoint would enable me to add music, sounds, and effects to my animation when I am showing my slideshows. It could also help me to put photos on advertising and use the bar graph or charts to show students statistics in the advertising presentation. On to number 9, read the scenario below and then answer the questions that follow. Again, I have up to draw this scenario here. So I'll read the scenario for you. So a teacher is standing at the door. Pretends here is the door. And she opens the door and she says, "Do I take your class for communication studies?" And then all 3 students are replying at once. So the first student says, "No, miss, you have another English class now." And the second student says, "Miss, you had us yesterday." And then the last student said, "Miss, do you want to take our class now?" So all 3 of them replied. And then the teacher then said, "You children never listen to the question asked." Part A says, when students interpret the teacher's question, they are operating at the interpretation stage of the process of communication. Between which 2 stages of that process does the student's interpretation occur? So these 2 stages are decoding and feedback. And then part B says, suggest 2 reasons why the teacher thinks the students did not listen to her. So based on the scenario here, there were barriers in the decoding process. So the students were speaking all at once, right? And look at the responses given here. Teacher wasn't satisfied with none of these responses. And then C, what purpose does the teacher's comment in box 2 of the scenario serve? And so just to remind you, the teacher's comment in box 2, you children never listen to the question asked. So I would say that this feedback here was to elaborate that the message intended by the sender, which was the teacher, was not decoded accurately by the receivers, which were the students, due to the barriers present. Lastly, number 10, your communication studies teacher has announced that she intends to shift from the method of chalk and talk and use the overhead projector and the slide presentation to more up-to-date information and communication technologies in her teaching in and out of the classroom. A, suggest 3 examples of more up-to-date information and communication technology which she could use, and give 1 purpose for which she might use each of the 2 examples. Ask for 3 examples here. I gave you 5. She could use tablets, video conferencing, smart boards, which are different from projectors. So I know they said projector here. Augmented reality, which is something new, which kind of gives students 3D experiences. And then audio enhancements like speakers or wireless microphones, like the teacher wearing a wireless microphone while standing at the back of the class, presenting something at the front of the class. Here are the corresponding purposes for the up-to-date information technologies. All right, students, thank you for joining, and see you at our next webinar, which are on Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. until. Remember to follow us on Instagram at DOA Caribbean Education and subscribe to our YouTube channel.